I was a professional actor for about 10 years, Broadway,
Mhm.
film and TV, and got my MFA at NYU graduate acting program. So full career doing that. But what I began to discover is that even more interesting than portraying characters on stage, I became totally fascinated by how people learn to do that activity. And so I started becoming really obsessed about how can you help people be more effective and calmer and more themselves in front of audiences. So this was a somewhat natural evolution into that. I started the company in 2010 and it took off relatively quickly. In large part, I mean, I like to think that I'm good at my job, but I won't take all the credit for that. The biggest thing is that we really developed a way in which to use embodied cognition. And by that, I mean getting
Mm.
people to use their bodies to build habits. So, like the adage of learning to ride a bicycle and you never forget. And we developed a whole suite of kinesthetic tools to help people be more effective. I really discovered as an actor that half my time on stage was slightly equivalent to torture. Painful, agonizingly self-conscious, hyper aware of every little thing, and relentlessly self-critical. And what I discovered was that if I could put my focus on something very concrete, it was literally the only way I could navigate through those moments of like really painful self-consciousness. And what I discovered was that simply doing, putting the focus on doing and doing behaviors and just putting one foot in front of the other actually led to much greater healing and greater um, escape, deliverance, all those sorts of words. If you help people who are in a similar moment of agony, which for many people, public speaking is equivalent to agony. If you give them very concrete things that they can do and succeed at, they can get past this agonizing moment and experience a little tiny brief moment of victory. And from that moment of victory, you can build and build and build. And pretty soon, they've established a completely different kind of muscle memory that can help them succeed.
Hmm. Wow.
One of the first really profound experiences I had individually coaching someone is when I dreamt up this Lego block idea because he was having a really difficult time memorizing anything. And he would try to say even one sentence and he would forget where he was partway through. And then he would scream at himself inside, "Oh, I'm an idiot. I can't think anything. I can't remember anything. I'm terrible." And so what I was trying to get him to do was to give himself just a moment longer before all the terrible self-critical berating voices came
Mhm.
alive in his brain.
Mhm.
And so I had him share one idea at a time and stack a Lego block at the end of each idea. So all of a sudden, that little moment of stacking the Lego block, it gave him something to do rather than, "You're terrible, you can't memorize anything, what a terrible communicator you are." He had a distraction, something he had to do. And then in that moment, this total miracle happened, which his brain had a moment to think and actually recall the information he was trying to remember. And
Hmm.
lo and behold, he could memorize things. There was a person I worked with one time who would always blush and very, very intensely. And I mean instantly. She would start public speaking and instantly turn beet red. And she felt terrible about this and very self-conscious. And so the first thing she said to me is, "I have to stop turning red." And I said
Hmm.
back to her, "That's not true. You have to stop moving your feet." She looked at me rather blankly. And what was going on was that she would begin speaking, and totally different than how she would stand or use her body if she was talking to a friend at the proverbial water cooler. She would begin to relentlessly shift her weight back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, almost like miniature pacing, but very rapid pacing. Now, at the same time, she'd be turning beet red and she'd be trying to hide this by continually smoothing back her hair over her face, trying to almost camouflage this activity with this motion of her hands over and over again. So I actually crouched down and I gave her feet some physical feedback to find stillness. I tapped on the top of her feet,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
books on top of her feet to keep them anchored to the ground. And when she did that, all of a sudden, magically, she actually took a breath in. Her diaphragm dropped down, her lungs filled with air, and her entire communication instrument became still and grounded.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden, she spoke more slowly for a moment. She breathed in. She got a better idea. She realized she actually had something to say to start the speech off, and she didn't blush. And 30
Hmm.
seconds later, she was still going strong, thinking of ideas to share. And then she got this wave of almost euphoria, not because of anything I had done, but rather euphoria at this realization that this years long struggle was at least on the precipice of changing and changing totally.
Sometimes you have to act your way into proper thinking instead of trying to think your way into proper acting, right?
100%.
Hmm.
If I could, if 1,000% was a thing, I would say 1,000%. But 100%, yes, precisely.
Hmm.
Silent storytelling, finger walking, stacking Lego blocks, using wiffle balls to throw and focus on eye contact in a very profoundly different way than most people are used to doing that. You are 100% right. And again, back to the performing arts theme, actors know this as inside out versus outside in approaching of a character. And a lot of folks know of like method acting, the sort of, American legacy of acting, which is if you put yourself into the experience of feeling how the character feels, then you'll behave as that character might likely behave. But there's a flip side too, which is to your point, if you act how that character would act, not only do you still portray the character faithfully, but oftentimes it actually works its way in and you begin to feel that way as well.
I'd love to hear what the 5 P's of vocal variety are because I've learned how important vocal variety is.
Yeah. And those 5 P's are pace, pitch, pause, power, and placement. Probably the
Hmm.
first four are instantly familiar. Let's go through them quickly. Pace is speed, so that's fast and slow.
Mhm.
Pitch is the note on a musical clef, high or low, so high or low. Pause is exactly what
Mhm.
it sounds like, silence, and maybe even varied lengths of silence. Power is just another word for volume, so that's loud and soft. And then placement is probably the only one that's not instantly familiar. Placement means where is the sound placed in your body? A big misconception that people have about speaking is that it's a totally cognitive activity. Like, if I think of smart words, I will say smart words. It's a physical activity. I mean, even just the act of enunciation, if you think for a moment, even just saying the word enunciation, how deeply physical that is. The easiest example to think about is if you have a friend with a really nasal voice, what's happening technically is the sound is only amplifying in like the nasal passages in the nasal area of the face. So that's
Yeah.
the 5th P, placement. And we use these 5 Ps of vocal variety to do a whole bunch of really important purposes like convey meaning, convey emotion, create surprise, and more. And we can talk about it more if you want to, but those are the 5 Ps. We are actually in the midst of a real crucible moment in which how our kids learn to speak is a little bit under threat because they spend so much time looking at these devices right here. And for those of you who are just listening, of course, I'm holding up my cell phone. And because they're not actually kind of learning interpersonal behavior and interpersonal dynamic in the same three-dimensional 24/7 kind of way that previous generations did, it's fraught. It's in a little bit of danger right now. And we take these skills for granted. We should not. I'm going to offer a tactical suggestion first because it's so useful and so relevant to selling. And you can do it today and make your life better right away. The exercise is called finger walking. The skill is called linguistic precision, which means essentially, are you choosing words or are words just choosing you? So the exercise is simply when you're practicing asking questions and getting better at doing that, you do this exercise that's featured in the chapter on linguistic precision. You walk your fingers across a table or desk, choosing each and every single word that comes out of your mouth. The finger steps are the equivalent of the act of choosing words. So in a sense, you're walking your ideas across the table. Now that's the skill, but the way to apply it, if you're in a selling situation, is to practice asking single questions with linguistic precision. So there's no filler, no non-fluencies. And then at the end of the question, draw an imaginary question mark in silence. Now, this is really powerful for people in a sales role, because what you'll see is that oftentimes they're great at chit chat, they're great at rapport building, they're really good at asking questions to learn more about the person. And then they get to the crucial moment of asking for a next meeting or asking for the business, and their communication falls apart. And they ask like 9 questions in a row, and they talk really quickly, and they have a bunch of stumbles, and they go that, and they back up, they don't, and all of it crumbles. And so you're practicing this very singular skill of asking one question with linguistic precision and then tolerating relaxed silence at the end, so that you build the muscle of saying something like, how would you like to move this forward? When would you like to meet again? Is there anyone else that we should loop into this conversation? And these kind of what we call, closing questions. And very often sales folks will have a moment or two within interactions that feel really fraught for them. And if they can build that skill, single questions with linguistic precision and relaxed silence at the end, it really helps them. I became frustrated with how stymied people were by really bad advice. And I don't mean to say bad advice like they're being sabotaged by people, but bad advice sounds like this: just be yourself. Just be conversational. Just be natural. These sorts of things are intended to relax the person you're talking to, but they don't, because all they do is make the person think more about themselves. And they're not relaxed. They don't feel like themselves. They don't feel conversational. They feel perhaps rocked with self-consciousness. If we think of part of speaking as this act of being present and being focused on the other person, you can't be present if you're thinking about all the stuff you forgot or anxious about all the stuff you're about to forget. So very often written materials, although intended to be a support, very often they cannot be that helpful, because it puts you in the past or the future endlessly. And the act of speaking is a physical one. You're not going to be giving someone a PDF with a bunch of bullets on it. You're turning air into sound and then sound into words. You're doing it real time, and it's being received real time. So anything you can do to help yourself be in the present, as opposed to, those 2 other time zones that are not that helpful, can be really powerful. Because here's the funny thing. I've actually helped many people experience that wow, I'm better when I'm not quite so anchored to my notes. The hard part is getting them to have the trust and faith to actually try and test it without it, and kind of get their sea legs with that, because it takes some bravery of letting go.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast, and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.